Chris, this Dobbs decision and the overturn of Roe and the trigger laws that a dozen plus states had ready to go has created a lot of confusion, especially in states where they weren't exactly ready to go. But there's a quick push in some of them to implement an outright ban or serious and severe restrictions on abortion. And that has led to a lot of people wondering, well, what's my legal status and what can I do in my state? And then a corresponding push in Congress to codify a right to interstate travel to seek abortion care. And one of the battlegrounds for this fight, it comes out of Ohio, which is your and my home state. And I was wondering if you can give us an overview of what happened there in this horrifying story involving a 10-year-old who needed an abortion. And she traveled to Indiana to get that care, and there's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of, insistence that different places in different states weren't following the law, or that this wasn't necessary. And also now potentially a push to punish the doctor in Indiana who performed the abortion. Could you give us an overview of what happened there and what caused this confusion and then the fallout this created?
I mean, what caused the confusion? Let's just be clear. What caused the confusion is the intentional plans of this sort of legislation. This legislation is vague. It's supposed to be broad and expansive. The lawmakers who pass it say that it is broad and expansive. And that's on purpose because they want to scare doctors into not being willing to perform marginal abortions because they would be setting themselves up for potential criminal penalties. This is a felony in Ohio under the 6-week ban law that is now applicable in Ohio. And so that's the cause. Let's just be clear from the get-go. Nothing else that happened is the main cause of this. The cause is this was the intent of the law. It was intended to cause confusion. It was intended to cause fear. It was intended to cause difficulty for medical providers to know what behavior would be legal. What happened was the law was passed. It was put on hold because of Roe versus Wade. And then the day that Dobbs came down, the Attorney General of Ohio, Dave Yost, went to court that morning within the hour of the decision coming down to get that injunction lifted so that the ban would go into effect. Later that day, the judge complied and the ban was in effect. What was unknown at the time was that 2 days earlier, the Franklin County not public health, Children's Services, I believe, Franklin County Children's Services was alerted to this abuse case, which led to the police being informed of this abuse case. And this 10-year-old child who, based on the time of based on reporting that I've seen from the Dispatch and the Indianapolis Star, that she was actually raped at 9 years old, but was 10 now, went to this doctor in Ohio, but was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. And so because she was past that deadline, the doctor contacted a doctor in Indianapolis and asked if the doctor in Indianapolis would be able to help. That doctor was. And so the family traveled to Indianapolis, and this 10-year-old girl got an abortion. And at the same time, the existence of this case appeared in a story on July 1st in the Indianapolis Star. It sort of became a crystallization of the fears of what these laws would lead to. And so it was discussed. And the fact that it was being discussed over a holiday weekend to be blunt, when there wasn't a lot else happening, probably led to it becoming an even bigger story. By time President Biden cited to the case in his speech, it had already started. There was this counter dialogue from the right that this case was made up, that the doctor who was quoted on the record by name in the Indianapolis Star story they were questioning whether the story was even real, which then returns us to the Ohio AG, who this past Monday went on to Fox News and told Jesse Waters that he questioned whether it was real. And Jesse Waters specifically referred to it as possibly being a hoax. And Yost, on two different occasions, he talked about whoever the Ohio doctor was, he said, like, if they exist. And then once when referring to the 10-year-old, he said, if she exists. And so there was this effort to basically claim that the case wasn't real. And then, of course, the
fact checkers got involved.
I don't even, honestly, like, we could get into that, but I don't want to get into that. Yeah. Like, I mean, there was irresponsible journalism across the board. But then there was responsible journalism, and the Columbus Dispatch was present at a court hearing, I believe, I don't know what time is anymore, on Wednesday, in which the man accused of rape in this case was in court and was charged. Which then the forces who had been saying the case was a lie moved on to other things, that the man charged with the rape is undocumented, the questions about the doctor in Indiana, questions about whether there were appropriate reporting mechanisms in Ohio, questions about whether the 10-year-old actually had to leave the state, which I reported. The Ohio Legislative Service Commission said that, contrary to what Dave Yost said, there is no categorical exemption for a 10-year-old who's raped. And so now we're back. And I mean, like, that's the overall story. But like, and I mean, in the course of this, like, the Wall Street Journal, like, issued a horrible editorial. But like, one point that I raised during all of this was this idea that, like, yes, the journalism, like, that the Dispatch did was really important and good and valuable, and we want, like, factual reporting about the claims made in this aftermath of Roe, in this post-Roe landscape. This reporting is essential, but at the same time, we also have past evidence of what happens. There was a brief at the Supreme Court from NAPW, I think it's like National Advocates for Pregnant Women, that detailed that there have been more than 1,600 cases of women being charged or prosecuted for pregnancy-related outcomes since Roe, in between Roe and the end of Roe. And so, like, we already have evidence that people who are pregnant can be and are prosecuted. We also already have evidence that they are investigated, that they are coerced by the state into taking actions, primarily related to drug-related investigations. And we also have the pre-Roe landscape. We know how police and prosecutors and agents of the state can act and can be coercive to women, even if women or other pregnant people don't have like criminalization of themselves personally. They can still be coerced. There's an incredible book by Leslie Regan, when abortion was a crime, I believe is the name of it. And in that book, she details extensively ways in which women were coerced by the state pre-Roe, despite the fact that they weren't being charged. They were forced to testify against doctors. And I use forced in quotes. It was always a situation where the police would claim that they weren't coerced, but then Leslie's book looks at the actual circumstances, and you sort of look askance at the claim that these women weren't being coerced. There was one situation where they were like literally stopped by the police as they left a clinic and were told to come down to the station. And so like this is the reality that we have. And so to say, in light of all of that evidence about how pregnancy outcomes were criminalized under Roe and how people who were pregnant were treated before Roe, to say that we should look at any claim of a horrible thing happening now and allow anybody to make a presumption that it's false is belied by, to quote our friend Sam Alito, belied by history and tradition. History and tradition do tell us that women and other pregnant people are going to be treated horribly, and it's important that journalists not fall in a trap of spending all their time proving whether every claim of a horror story is true, and instead looking at what are the mechanisms of power that are enabling this, and what is the harm that those elected officials are allowing.
Thank you for listening to this sample of the Insurgents podcast. To hear the rest of this episode and for more bonus content, please subscribe at theinsurgents.substack.com.